This is the PC I've been using since starting my YouTube channel 3 years ago. It's got a 4090 and a 5950X, it's definitely no slouch and it served me incredibly well. But last year, thanks to me upgrading my camera and monitor, I've started playing, filming and rendering my videos in 4K, and that's when the problem started. CPU heavy games like Zelda Breath of the Wild VR and Minecraft VR began struggling. But the biggest issue for me was After Effects. Editing became incredibly slow and 4K renders were taking hours. So about midway through last year, I started to think about upgrading from this machine. But I didn't want to just upgrade, I wanted to challenge myself by building my first ever Mini-ITX PC. And the idea behind it was this: no RGB, no nonsense, just pure performance in a tiny package. And 6 months later, I'm happy to say that I finally built the thing. This is the most powerful PC I have ever made. It took me 5 whole days to build, and it even has some 3D printed parts, some of which I modeled myself. If you're expecting this video to be like an Optimum style professional PC build video, this is not that. This video is going to show you what happens when an idiot attempts to make a small form factor PC build, and I'm really hoping that this PC is going to be the answer to my problems. Let's start with the case. I went with the pretty much classic at this point NCase M2 for this build. And it was only when I held it in my hands that I realized just how small this case is. This thing is tiny, and as you're going to see, it was a bit of a challenge getting this build to work. Then, for the motherboard, I decided to go with the ROG Strix X870i for this build. It's a really nice motherboard, it has lots of USB-C ports which I need, and it's really well suited for the CPU I chose, the AMD 9950X3D. This thing is literally one of the best CPUs you can get without going into Threadripper territory. I was secretly hoping in January AMD would officially announce the 9950X3D2 that was rumored, but that didn't happen, so I went with this one. Regardless, for my use case of gaming and editing, it's as perfect as I could hope for. That 3D cache should make a massive difference to my gaming, and it should be about 30% faster when it comes to my workflows in After Effects. Moving on to the storage, and for this I've gone with a 1TB Samsung 9100 Pro. This thing should be crazy fast and will serve as my C drive and also run all of my editing apps. And I've paired that with a 4TB Samsung 990 Pro, which will be used for all of the video files that I'm currently editing at the time, along with all of my game installs from Steam. Next up, we got the memory, and for this, I've managed to snag 96GB of Acer Predator RAM CL28. I've never had this much RAM in a PC before, and the crazy thing about this is I bought these sticks just as the RAM shortage was starting at the end of last year, and since then, these exact RAM sticks have tripled in price. Absolutely insane times we are living in right now, and I just feel so incredibly lucky to be able to put these in my machine. Anyways, as I often run Premiere Pro, After Effects, Photoshop, and other apps all at the same time, these sticks should make that a breeze. It was at this point that I noticed that the M.2s that I had just installed were bending when everything was put together, and I'm not gonna lie, it was freaking me out a bit. Luckily, Asus provides these rubber spacers with the motherboard, which actually solves that exact problem. So I put them on there and it was looking much better. Then it was time to attach the motherboard to the case frame. And for those of you that have never built a Mini-ITX PC before, or at least specifically an NCase ITX, you kind of need to simultaneously build the case and the PC at the same time, as it's such a tight squeeze. For me, this meant attaching the back and temporarily adding the bottom of the case so I could figure out the mounting position of the motherboard. And this was a very important step because if you remember in my original plan, I wanted a pure performance, no nonsense build. And for me personally, that means putting four 140mm fans in the top and the bottom of the case. But then I decided to go browsing on NCase's website and I saw this photo where they had put a Founders Edition card vertically in the case. And as soon as I saw that, it was over. I knew I needed to put that in this build. But this introduces a problem because if you want to mount a card vertically, normally in this case, you have to mount the riser bracket to the bottom of the case, meaning I can't put an 140mm fan there if the riser cable's there. But I was like, nah, I want to have my cake and eat it too. So I started looking for a way to mount the GPU higher up so I could fit the 140mm fan underneath. And lucky for me, I found a post in NCase's subreddit from a user called Turkish Rambo. And he basically made this 2-part bracket system which was big enough to fit an 140mm fan underneath while also giving the GPU riser bracket bracket something to screw into. And this completely fixes the issue that I was having, so I went ahead and downloaded the files and started the 3D print. And when they were done, I think it came out looking pretty good. And speaking of maximizing performance for this build, that meant getting the best fans. And for me personally, that means Noctua. And on a whim, I just thought, hey, I'm gonna send Noctua an email, just explain to them what I'm trying to build, and see if they want to partner with me on this project. And as a YouTube channel with 30,000 subs, a tiny channel, I was really not expecting any sort of response. So you can imagine just how shocked I was when Noctua not only responded to me, but they were like, yeah, this is awesome, we'd love to help you out. So they sent me 4 of their new 140mm fans, the G2s, in Chromax Black to match the aesthetic of my build. And honestly, I cannot even believe that this is a thing. This video is not sponsored, there were no contract signed or any stipulations to Noctua sending me these. They simply liked what I was doing and wanted to help me. I've been a big fan, pun intended, of Noctua for a really long time. I've used their fans before to upgrade my 3D printer. So to have their fans in my PC means I know we'll be getting some of the best performance while also staying incredibly quiet. So Noctua, if you're watching this, you are a bunch of legends. Thank you so much. And if you want to check out any of their products, I put links in the description down below. Anyway, the reason I got the fans out at this point was because I needed to figure out roughly how high to mount the motherboard on the case. So I did just that and screwed the motherboard onto the frame. Then it was time to attach the power supply, the ROG low-key 1200 watt titanium. With the CPU and GPU I've chosen for this build, going with the 1200 watt should be sufficient to run everything nicely. And I'm not gonna lie, up to this point the build had been pretty chill, but from here things started to get complicated as wire management suddenly becomes a thing. I now understand why people who make ITX builds will opt to either make their own custom length cables or pay someone to make them, because as soon as you start needing to accommodate excess cable, things instantly become more complex, as you'll see later on in this video. At this point, I attached the front and the bottom panels to the case, which meant I could also attach the bottom fan and the 3D printed riser bracket. And this is where I got to try something new that I'd never done before: heat inserts. If you don't know what this is, it's when you make small holes in your print, and that allows you to use a soldering iron to heat up a thread, and as you can see, it just melts into the 3D print through the hole. It bonds to the plastic, and that allows you to screw things into your 3D print. And I don't know why I thought this would be really finicky, but it was super easy, and the inserts just kind of slowly float down into the print. This allowed me to attach the two parts of the print together, screw it to the bottom of the case, and then mount the riser bracket to the bridge. I personally think this came out great, and in theory it should keep the GPU much more secure than if I had just used the mounting bracket on the back of the case. Anyways, next up is the CPU cooler, and for this I went with NZXT's Kraken Elite 280mm. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a little annoyed here. I wanted to make sure that the 9950X3D was really well cooled, and I specifically went with NZXT because I wanted an AIO that would work directly with the Noctua fans. And I spoke to NZXT support and they assured me that the model I bought would in fact work. You can probably guess where this is going, because when I opened this up and had a look, the fan plug on the AIO was a proprietary 8-pin connector and therefore would not work out of the box with my fans. And the best part about all of this is that NZXT actually has an adapter that would allow this to work, but they don't sell it on its own. No! So there is literally no way I could get the fans to plug directly into the AIO. Luckily for me, Noctua fans come with a regular fan splitter, so I could just plug the fans directly into the CPU fan header on the motherboard and it should still work fine. I then attached the Noctua fans to the radiator and then the radiator to the bracket. Anyways, moving on, I mounted the pump to the motherboard, and to give credit to NZXT, I really liked how much thermal paste they pre-applied to the copper. It made things super easy. And it was at this point that I made my first mistake. I found that the power cable extender, which also sits at the top of the case, was a bit of a tight squeeze when you put the radiator in. So without really thinking about it, I moved it down to the side of the case. Then I mounted the radiator, plugged in the fans, and honestly, I was quite surprised with how clean I'd managed to keep the build looking so far. But yeah, I quickly realized that the power cable's new position was not going to work when I plugged in the GPU, so I had to undo all the work I just did and then put the radiator back on. Luckily, I realized this early on, and if there's any lesson I can give to someone planning on making a Mini-ITX PC, it's that you really need to plan and consider everything before you move on to the next part. Because in a normal size PC, these sort of things are simple fixes, but in a Mini-ITX, it means taking apart half of the build to fix it. And just a little spoiler alert, at this point in the build, even after doing this, I still haven't learned that lesson yet. Then it was time to add probably the thing I was most proud of with this case. Like I mentioned, I specifically chose this motherboard because it has a ton of USB ports. But even then, I knew it still didn't have enough for what I was doing. And I really didn't want to add another USB hub that would sit on my desk. So I once again did a bit of research, and I saw on NCase's website that they had this really cool USB I/O that attaches to the bottom of the case and adds 4 more USB ports to it.
Sounds pretty perfect, right? Well, I waited months for NCase to restock those. I spoke to their chat, they said it would restock by December. It never did. I don't hold anything back, sometimes there's production issues, but it was taking too long, so I decided to buy my own one elsewhere. Yeah.
I ended up finding this Grau Gear 4-port USB front panel. It has 2 USB-Cs and 2 USB-A. All of them are USB 3.2 and it plugs directly into the motherboard. But there was a catch. The metal housing it sits in is pretty damn big and it would stand out quite a bit with the feet that I had also 3D printed for this case.
So that's when I made another big decision because I decided I was going to model, design, and print the housing myself. The problem with that is I'm terrible at it. In fact, let me show you. So this, this is the last 3D printed thing that I made as like a model to fit around something. What this thing is basically a little wireless Bluetooth keyboard that I've set up to act as kind of like a wireless stream deck. So I put it on my wrist and it allows me to control OBS in VR and change scenes without having to, take off my headset or go over to the computer, because that's kind of annoying in VR. But as you can see, this thing is kind of nowhere near perfect. I need to use this toothpick in here to like wedge it, otherwise it like moves around. I don't know if you can hear that. I would say it's about like 50 to 60% of the way there. But for this computer where I'm trying to make it look really nice, 50 to 60% is nowhere near good enough.
So I went into Fusion, a program I had barely used before, and really tried to get this right. It took me about 6 iterations, 3 to get the placement of the USB port holes correct, 2 to get the screw placements for the board right, and a final iteration to match the aesthetics of the hub to the 3D printed feet. And from that effort, I made this. I'd say it's about 80 to 90% of the way there, but for me as a first proper go at making something like this, I'll take that. But some of you may have noticed that there's in fact 2 problems with this design. Let me know in the comments if you spotted them. The first one being that I didn't account for the fact there are fan screws on the bottom of the case already, which when I press the I/O housing against it means it doesn't sit flush. And the second being that I didn't make any screw holes on the top of the housing to attach it to the case. And that's when I had the greatest idea ever. I decided to use the soldering iron, a screwdriver, and some sandpaper to melt, stab, and erode some holes, so that when I placed the housing on the case, it would sit nice and flush. Then for the screw holes, I marked where the screws would attach onto the housing through the case frame. Again, melted some smaller holes on those marks, and then used some spare fan screws to screw the USB mount to the case. And I'm not gonna lie, considering how awful the top of that housing looked after what I did to it, the end result came out really well. I got the screw placement exactly right so that it sits really nicely on the edge of the case. Then it was time to mount the feet, which because I am, once again, a genius, I had the exact same issue. The screws already attached to the case made it so that the feet wouldn't sit flush when mounted. And since it went so well the first time, I once again got the screwdriver and hot end pen and tortured these poor 3D prints until they sat nice and flush. And again, somehow they came out looking really good when the whole PC was sat upright. If you could see the inside of any of these feet, it's a whole nother story, but as you can't see it, I think we should just all forget about it. Then it was time to put the final component into this PC, the NVIDIA RTX 5090 Founders Edition. The fact that this thing is a 2-slot card is unbelievable, and I feel so incredibly lucky to have gotten my hands on one before the AI overlords scooped them all up. I personally love the way the FE cards look, and this one is no exception. And honestly, for the life of me, I don't get why the other card manufacturers don't make smaller version of their big boy cards. Like, why is NVIDIA the only one that ever attempts to make their cards not bricks? Anyways, this beast, along with all the other parts I've added to this build, should be able to handle anything I throw at it, editing, gaming, or VR, it doesn't matter. So I slotted it into the riser cable and it seemed that 3D printed bracket was doing its job quite well. Then to secure it even more, I used the vertical bracket that came with the case, and I used these really long M3 screws that came with the heat insert kit to hold the GPU onto that bracket. And with that, all of the components were in the case, and it came time to do the most nerve-wracking part of any PC build.
All right, the moment of truth. Where's the button? Here it is. Okay, it didn't boot.
As you just saw, I couldn't get this thing to boot, and I quickly discovered that I am naturally an idiot and didn't plug the CPU power cable in all the way. But even then, after that, it still didn't boot, and the GPU clearly was not getting any power.
And this, my friends, is where the pain of building in a Mini-ITX case start to show, because if I need to change anything in this PC, it basically means I have to take half of it apart.
I had to reseat the riser cable, the RAM, the PSU cables, but eventually...
Without further ado... Yes! Yes! The lights! The lights! Oh, yes! Finally! Woo!
So I installed Windows and got everything configured, and with that, the PC was now fully working and I could put the final parts on this case. And this is the final result. In terms of the aesthetics, I am so happy with it. I'm so glad that I went with the vertical mount in the end, as I think it looks really good seeing the white X through the mesh panel. It's not too in your face and it looks really clean, especially when I turn the lights down.
But I'm gonna be honest with you guys here, the aesthetics of this PC are really just a bonus, and a bonus is only good if the main event, I guess, is also good. So the real question is, how does this bad boy perform compared to this, my old PC? Whew. Look at the size difference.
First, I did some stress tests on the CPU and GPU to make sure the cooling was working well. In Cinebench, I did a 30-minute multi-core stress test. The CPU stayed at an average temp of 78.6 degrees Celsius, and considering this is a small form factor 9950 X3D build, I'm super happy with that. Despite me being annoyed about the fan connectors, I gotta give NZXT props, as the AIO with the Noctua fans handled this really well. Then for the GPU, I did a 20-minute Furmark test, and the GPU was mainly at 71 degrees for the whole test and didn't go above 72 degrees, which again, I'm pretty happy with. Then I moved on to testing out some gaming, and I started by playing the only flat screen game I had installed at the time, Arc Raiders. And I know this probably isn't the best game to test, as I know it's quite well optimized, but on my old PC running this little test in the practice area, the frame rate went from a low of 80 to a high of 100 FPS at 4K native max settings, and on the new PC running that exact same test, it hit a low of 110 FPS and a high of 140.
Then I decided to do some tests on VR games, and I specifically chose 4 VR games that on my old PC it started to struggle with a bit. And those games are Fallout 4 VR, No Man's Sky VR, Minecraft VR, and Breath of the Wild VR. And just a fair warning, these results may be slightly confusing at first, but don't worry, I promise by the end of this, everything will be very clear.
I started with Fallout 4, and on my old PC I was hitting 60 to 70 FPS, but with big dips in hectic situations. And on the new PC, it was a solid 75 FPS, which is the max that my kind of headset can do. It can only do 75 Hz, and there were absolutely no dips that I could see. Then I moved on to trying out No Man's Sky VR, and on my old PC at native quality ultra settings in the spaceport, I was hitting around 35 to 45 FPS. Then with the new PC, again, the same settings, it fluctuated more, getting more frames from 35 FPS to about 60 FPS. Then I did some tests in Minecraft VR. For these tests, I used the same fabric version, the same game version, the same mods and shaders, and even the same save file. On my old PC, when I went into the jungle, which is quite an intense area, it really struggled with about 23 to 35 FPS and about 50 to 70 FPS generally, but again, there was some massive dips while I was playing. But with the new PC in the jungle, I was hitting 40 to 45 FPS, and in general, I was hitting about 60 to 75 FPS, and again, there was not really any dips.
So you might imagine, after doing those 3 tests, I was left a tad bit confused. I was really expecting this new PC to handle these games much better than the old. Naturally, I assumed this was like a user error problem and not a problem with the PC, so I started trying to figure out why this result was happening, and I found out the reason, and yeah, it was my fault.
I had forgotten that on my old PC, I would manually change the resolution of each VR game in the Steam settings to match my headset's 2560 by 2560 per eye. But because I forgot that, I didn't do that on the new PC. And so what these results show for the new PC is the performance when the PC is rendering each eye at 3560 by 3560 per eye. And when you do the math, that means the new PC was rendering at nearly double the resolution of the old PC.
So just to be completely clear, this new PC can run the games at the same level or if not higher frame rates than this PC, while also rendering basically double the pixels. That's pretty damn impressive.
And I actually ended up kind of proving this when I tested Zelda Breath of the Wild VR, because that runs off of CMU, which sets the resolution itself. So in this case, Steam VR doesn't change anything. And on my old PC, I was getting a maximum of about 40 FPS, and then in some places like the Village, it dropped down to below 20 FPS. But with the new PC, I saw quite literally the FPS double to about 60 FPS average. And in the stressful areas like the Village, I did see a drop in FPS, but it was significantly less to about 40 FPS average. And for me specifically, this is a fantastic result. Anyone that's played VR knows that you cannot play games at probably lower than 40 FPS, otherwise you will get incredibly motion sick. And what this meant is when I was playing Zelda Breath of the Wild VR on my old computer, I could only play for a couple of hours before I had to stop. But now that I've doubled my FPS here, I can play this for a 5-hour stream and not break a sweat. So it's made this game very much playable for me. So yeah, I am incredibly happy.
Then the final thing I needed to test between these two PCs is how the new PC handles editing, rendering, and basically After Effects.
For this, I decided to do a very simple test. I loaded up the same video file on both PCs, clicked render, and watched to see which one would finish first. The specific video I chose for this was my Alien Rogue Incursion video. The reason being is it uses both Premiere Pro files and After Effects files. And fun fact, it was actually me attempting to render this video on my old PC that made me realize I needed to upgrade, because it took me about 3 days to get this to render. It kept crashing, the render kept failing at the end, and it literally took, I think, 5 hours in total once it actually finally rendered to render an 8-minute video. Now, seeing as I didn't want this test to run for 5 hours, I decided to have both PCs render about 1/4 of the video. So I got both PCs ready and pressed start at the same time. The old PC took 45 minutes to render, and the new PC took 20. So that's a pretty damn impressive improvement, and I think this mainly comes down to the 9950 X3D really putting in the work with the After Effects portion of this render.
Alright, so I'm just watching these two renders go head to head, and you can actually see this one is a lot slower. It's like the frames are a lot less compared to that one, which is almost kind of moving slowly. And that is my new PC. As you can imagine, I am incredibly happy with it. This thing is an absolute monster. And most importantly, it means I can get back to making some of my green screen effects if I feel like it. But yeah, I would definitely say building a Mini-ITX PC is a challenge. There were times where I was having a lot of fun with it because it's more like a puzzle, but there were also times where I was quite literally ripping my hair out. There were also some other positives. For example, building this, and specifically the 3D printing part, reminded me how much I enjoy doing 3D printing. And since then, I've discovered something called Gridfinity, and I know if there are any 3D printers out there, I know I'm behind on this quite a ways, but that is another rabbit hole that I'm probably gonna have to go down at some point on the channel because it's amazing. But the other incredibly huge bonus is that my old PC has now become my streaming PC. The reason that's important is if you've ever watched one of my live streams before, you'll know that my setup was an absolute mess because my old streaming PC couldn't handle streaming and recording and multi-streaming all at the same time. It could only stream to YouTube and Twitch, and then it could do nothing else, which meant I had to have my laptop recording the gameplay, the raw gameplay, and it was just a massive mess. Whereas now, this old PC, which is now the streaming PC, can handle streaming to YouTube, YouTube Shorts, Twitch, and record gameplay in 4K at 60 FPS all at the same time. It has made my setup so more streamlined, and I've moved the position of my desk and everything, so this has been a big, massive change, and I'm very, very happy with it. If I were to improve this in any way, I would definitely say I would make my own custom cables, learn how to make them, or just pay someone to make cables for me, because that was the most difficult part of this build, figuring out the wire management. But yeah, even with the wire management not being exactly how I'd want it, I'm still super duper happy with this build. I think I did a pretty damn good job. I especially love, like I said, the 3D printed parts that I 3D modeled. I'm proud of it, and it's gonna be serving me very well, hopefully, from now on. And I gotta say, I have a newfound respect for YouTubers like Optimum and the PC building YouTuber space, because they make it seem like building a small form factor PC, they make it look like a breeze. And it's not. It's not. But yeah, I cannot wait to get streaming and making new videos on this new PC. It is gonna be awesome.